Sovereign debt influence. So here's the deal with sovereign debt influence. It's basically when a country's debt, traded on global markets, gives big investors serious leverage over that country's economic policy. Break down the term. Sovereign means the nation's independence. Debt is what they owe, and influence is the power play. Put it all together, and you've got a story about how national debt quietly becomes a tool for economic and political pressure. When a country regularly issues government bonds to international markets, they're automatically stepping into an arena dominated by institutional heavyweight investors. We're talking global pension funds, foreign sovereign wealth funds, hedge funds managing hundreds of billions, major banks, the whole nine yards. These players have deep pockets and move massive amounts of capital, so every decision they make can send a country's bond prices trembling. Now, when a country needs cash, maybe to cover a deficit, build infrastructure, close budget gaps, they've got to maintain their reputation so investors keep buying their bonds. This reputation is called creditworthiness. Basically, the country's ability and willingness to pay debts on time. If creditworthiness drops, bond yields spike. Yield is the rate of return investors demand as compensation for risk. Think of it like interest, except it moves with bond prices trading up and down in the market. That's where things get critical. When a country implements policies that global investors don't like, say excessive subsidies, bailing out specific companies, printing too much money, or suddenly nationalizing key industries, major investors can threaten, "We're dumping your bonds." When bonds get sold off en masse, prices tank, yields skyrocket, and the country's borrowing costs shoot up immediately. The government has to pay higher interest on new debt, and that can blow a hole straight through the national budget. That financial pressure ricochets back into political decisions. Countries that were acting tough suddenly cave because if they dig in their heels, interest costs will explode, currency could crash, inflation could spiral out of control. We've seen this play out in Argentina, Turkey, Greece, and others. Even countries considered strong, like Italy or the UK, have felt bond markets punish fiscal policies deemed reckless.
Real-world examples. Take the 2011 Eurozone crisis. Italy was ground zero. PM Silvio Berlusconi was in charge. And when markets started doubting Italy's ability to reduce its deficit, global investors began selling Italian government bonds. Yields climbed past 7%. For a developed nation, that's a red alert. High yields mean ballooning debt costs, and when costs balloon, the budget basically gets gutted from the inside. Berlusconi initially resisted, but markets kept hammering. Bond yields kept rising, political pressure from the EU piled on, and eventually he resigned. Many economists say it wasn't the people who brought him down, it was the international bond market dictating the timing of his fall. Then there's Greece during the same era. When it came out that they'd been cooking the books on deficit reporting, investors dumped Greek bonds wholesale. Prices collapsed, yields exploded, and when yields explode, the country can't borrow anymore. The IMF and EU stepped in with a bailout, but the conditions were brutal. Wage cuts, pension cuts, slashed public spending. Those policies weren't purely the Greek government's choice. They were the result of negotiations forced by the threat of, if you don't comply, we'll let your yields rise until you're completely bankrupt. The market opened the door to pressure, international institutions walked through to lock it shut. Fast forward to 2022, when the UK tried aggressive tax cuts under PM Liz Truss's economic plan. Global investors immediately thought the policy was nonsensical because it would balloon the deficit. So they started selling UK government bonds, gilts, in large volumes. Prices dropped sharply, yields spiked, the pound sterling tanked. Within 3 days, the UK pension system nearly collapsed because pension funds were holding tons of gilts that had just gotten hammered. The Bank of England had to launch emergency intervention to rescue the market. Trust was forced to reverse her policies, and weeks later she was out. Fastest prime ministerial fall in British history. Again, it wasn't the opposition that brought her down, it was the market. And when Argentina hit turbulence in 2018 to 2020, foreign investors skeptical about the government's ability to service debt started dumping their bonds. The peso crashed, inflation soared, the budget got shredded. Market pressure left the government with few options except crawling back to the IMF for a massive loan, with policy change conditions they never wanted in the first place. The pattern across all these cases is identical. When bond markets move in unison, governments that thought they had sovereignty suddenly realize most of their policies actually depend on investor confidence. And when that confidence gets pulled, countries can lose political stability within weeks. All of this has happened before, and it can happen anytime a country lives on debt. At the end of the day, this influence becomes a kind of shadow authority. Countries appear to have sovereignty, but as economies grow more dependent on global markets, that sovereignty gets gradually displaced by market mechanisms. Investors don't need seats at the cabinet table, don't need military threats, just shake up the bond market. When that happens, national policy changes not because of internal political debate, but because of panic signals from global markets. So behind every fiscal policy announcement, there's always the shadow of the international bond market doing the math. You guys seriously going to do that? We can push your yields up 150 basis points in a single day if you try something weird. And when a country lives on debt, the market's voice can sound a hell of a lot louder than Parliament's.